at the hour of 12 noon on a Monday, October the 24th, 1988. And already we are in major trouble. We, of course, being myself, the crew here at 970 WFLA. That's News Radio 970 WFLA. To be precise, of course, the J-Corps Corporation. No, not. Well, you don't really need to get into all of that. I haven't the vaguest idea. I really haven't the vaguest idea as to just what in the hell I'm doing here. I mean, Mondays are bad days as a general rule of thumb for most of us, yours truly included, but today is even worse. I have no idea under the sun what I want to talk to you about, and yet there are a zillion things I want to talk to you about, almost none of which I have any reason to suspect you would want to talk to me about. I mean, we're talking about serious trouble here, boys and girls. Well, the least I can do is to bring you up to speed. I mean, I know that most of you sit out there and say, gee, I wonder what Lassiter did on his weekend. The least I can do is to bring you up to speed, is to just, what happened between the last time we chatted officially and this point in time. Of course, there was the great Friday night, whatever it was, with Savin' Sam, Mad Dog, and your friend and mine, Ollie. That was fantastic. It was almost like old times. From 8 until 11, screaming, shouting, bitching, moaning, even suckered Valrico Cookie in on that one. Even got the Valrico Cookie himself, called him a subhuman pig, and hung up on the SOB, which I'll do any time that somebody suggests that just because someone has been in the military, we should forgive and overlook discretions that come after that. But nonetheless, it was a fun time. It was great. And had I not done 3 hours earlier in the day and been so tired, I would have probably kept going till 1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. You never know about those kinds of things. Because I pretty much had carte blanche, to do whatever the hell I wanted to do. And it's not every night that you can take over the radio station. And that was an awful lot of fun. Saturday was a lot of fun. Well, at least the first part of the day was. Went over to the Continental Deli. You hear us talking about the Continental Deli over in Ybor City all the time, where they have the most dynamite sandwiches, and they truly do. But also got to meet Al, who runs the place. He is a trip and a half. Love the guy. What a fantastic little guy. Great story. Al is a great American dream come true type of story. Started his business with $500 11 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That was fun. Sunday. Oh, my God. Sunday was a disaster. I had the displeasure of sitting in the stands at Tampa Stadium watching one of the most inept pass defenses I have ever seen in my entire life. I mean, if it wasn't for, I don't know how to put it, if it wasn't for the absolute zombies that were playing defense for the Minnesota Vikings, that team would have had at least 9 interceptions. At least 9. I mean, I have never seen such incompetence in my entire life as on the part of the Minnesota defense. I mean, Vinny did everything in his power to give those guys a record. I mean, he did everything he could possibly do to send them home with a bare minimum of 9 interceptions, and they kept dropping the ball. And they only got 6 of them. Whoa, I mean, I felt like asking for my money back. I mean, I was going to stop by the ticket office and ask, for Culverhouse and say, hey, Culverhouse, why don't you get some real competition in here? Guys that can catch the ball that Vinny throws. Yeah, this is disgusting, I mean, good God, we don't expect you to put on any show, but we do expect a show from the other guys. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, all I got for it was sunburn. I only saw 6 interceptions. And that cost me $63 for tickets to sit on a 30-yard line, 74 rows up, plus $4 for parking, about $8, $9, $10. I don't know what it was for Cokes and hot dogs and that kind of stuff. No, I didn't buy a program. I know who they are. Oh yeah, and the $2.50 for the seat so that I might for my $63 worth of tickets be a little bit comfortable. I mean, I still may ask for the money back. I mean, if he can't get better competition in there than Minnesota, if he can't get guys in there that can really put on a show, then I don't see any sense in going over there. I don't see any sense in going over there at all. I mean, I really wanted to see 9 interceptions. I deserved 9 interceptions. Vinny did everything in his power to give me 9 interceptions. But now, those clowns in purple kept on dropping the ball. I mean, it wasn't even like there would be 2 or 3 guys in orange shirts around them. It was just one guy in an orange shirt up against 3, 4, 5 guys in purple shirts. It wasn't like the competition, was too stiff from Tampa. I just don't understand. And then, of course, there is the continuing saga of Lassiter's Lincoln. I thought for sure, I genuinely and truly, when I got home Friday night, there she was. You remember Miss Point A to Point B? I mean, she was almost as sweet and as kind as the last time I took her to the jewelry store. And she was saying, oh, I don't know. I've been starting to think Lincoln. I'm thinking Lincoln. I said, oh boy, here's a crack. At the dinner table, she said, well, I said to my sister today, I said if he meets a certain price, then I'll go for it. And I said, well, what's the price? She said, I'm not going to tell you. Oh, God. But nonetheless, another crack in this wall. Another crack in the postcards that came in on Friday, they tickled the hell out of her. I mean, she wants to keep them. More came in today. She wants to keep those. She has a tape of the entire program. She wants to keep it. I mean, she is as amused with this as you can begin to imagine. When she was out and about Friday, she picked up 2 of these little auto bingo things. The kind of stuff you get to a 9-year-old who's sitting in the back seat. And, it's got little things that slide over when you see a Volvo or when you see a Buick or whatever it might be. And she literally said to me, she said, if you fill these both up, you can get the Lincoln. I had them filled without going outside the house. I just went over to the front window. So, there's a BMW over there. There's a Jaguar. There's a Mercedes. There's a Buick. There's a Lincoln. There's a Cadillac. There's a Ford. Bam, 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 bam. Had them all filled up. But she wouldn't talk about it at all on Saturday. She wouldn't talk about it at all on Sunday. I said to her last night as we were going to bed, I said, so you're thinking of Lincoln again, right? And she said, no, what makes you think that? Oh, God. This is really, I mean, this is, it's not fair. It simply is not fair that I have to go through with this. There were other things that drove me insane over the weekend, besides Ollie's speech. And I'm sitting back thinking, holy fuck, freaking nothing. I was sitting around thinking, I really do this kind of stuff. I really sit home and think, $17 billion for a buyout, $12 billion to take some, that's $29 billion. Forget the interest, which would easily shove it up to 40, 45, 50. Billions of dollars. Not to create one job, as a matter of fact, probably to eliminate several thousand. Not to build one factory. But just all these billions upon billions upon billions of dollars sucked from the economy so that a handful of guys can get richer than they already are. And nobody says anything about it. No, they're talking about death penalties and pledges of allegiance and that kind of crap. I don't know, maybe I'm just getting old. You know what I mean? I know I'm only 43, or at least yesterday I would have said only 43, but maybe I'm just getting old. Damn it, things are changing too fast. I don't like it. Nor is there anything I can do about it. You see, I was born in the mid-1940s, September 30th, 1945 to be precise. I grew up actually in the 50s, and of course I call myself a child of the 60s. I was 15 going into 1960, 25 coming out. I was born at the end of the Second World War, exactly 3 months too soon to qualify as a baby boomer. Precisely 3 months too soon. I was growing up and forming my, whatever it is that you form in those years, when things like new cars were still an oddity. When things like ration stamps were still a fact of life. When TV antennas were a status symbol on a house. I grew up at a time when almost everybody owned their own house. Nobody rented. Neighborhoods tended to be ethnic in composition. There was the Italian neighborhood. There was the Polish neighborhood. There was the German neighborhood. There was the Irish neighborhood. There wasn't any place called Levittown when I was a kid. The suburbs were still pretty much of a dream. I knew every cop by name and every cop knew me and where I lived. Not because I was a delinquent, but because that's the way things were back then. In fact, just about everybody knew me. Literally everybody in town knew me because my mother was divorced. That was a big thing back then. It was only 43 years ago. There were still steam locomotives running on the old Pennsylvania-Reading Railroad line that went by my house. The TV station in Philadelphia didn't even sign on until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Coal trucks rumbled through the streets, as did ice wagons, and the Seal Test milkman delivered his milk with a horse-drawn wagon. All of this was in my lifetime. 43 years, an incredibly short period of time. Jet planes and satellites and color TVs and computers were things that you only dreamed about. These were things in the future. These were not reality. My family were dyed-in-the-wool Democrats because the Republicans were the party of the rich, the party that thought government served no other master than the business community. I, by the way, liked Ike. I remember that god-awful day that the Camden Courier-Post carried the headline saying that the evil Russians had launched something called Sputnik. And I remember one Vanguard rocket after another disintegrating on the launch pad. I remember all of that vividly, as though it were yesterday. I remember when you laughed at anything that had Made in Japan stamped on it. I remember how eagerly you waited for September to come around because that's when the new model automobiles went on sale. And it was a big thing. It was a damn big thing. I remember the nice old guy in the White House who played too much golf and got his facts mixed up. And I remember 1960 very clearly. I remember the presidential race in 1960s as though it, too, were just yesterday. I, by the way, supported Nixon. I didn't like the other guy. And a couple of years down the road, just as I was starting to like the other guy, damn it, somebody went and shot him. I remember Huntley and Brinkley talking on the news every night about some weird place called Vietnam and that there were people dying there and that we were supposed to be there to stop the onslaught of communism and that if we didn't, then there was this thing called the domino effect that somehow worked its way across the Pacific into Hawaii and then eventually California. They never did mention Arizona and Nevada, but was going to, I guess, just stop in California. I remember vividly the way that you kept track of the years. You see, the year started out on a midnight, standing out on your front porch, beating on a pot or a pan with a great big spoon, hollering, Happy New Year to the entire world. And the entire world consisted of your block. Oh, that was the world. You stood there hollering Happy New Year to the people standing on their front porches on your block. Then the year progressed. And somewhere, it would come down to a Friday afternoon when all the businesses were closed. They call that Good Friday, and that was followed by Easter, where you got a new outfit, and that was followed by Memorial Day, where everybody went downtown someplace to a memorial and remembered people who were dead before I was born. And that turned into the 4th of July, and the 4th of July were speeches and fireworks out behind the high school stadium. And that turned into Labor Day, one of the saddest days of the year, because Labor Day meant there was only one more day of summer vacation left. And that turned into Halloween, and Halloween was going out and soaping somebody's windows and then coming back the next day and asking them for candy and getting it. And that turned into Thanksgiving, when every year the turkey was bigger and better than the year before, and all the members of the family were somehow gathered around the table. And that turned into Christmas, the best day of all. And Christmas, of course, didn't even start until the Friday after Thanksgiving. And then before you know it, you were standing out on the front porch beating on a pot or a pan hollering Happy New Year.
Would even remove the words, In God We Trust, from our legal tender. 970 WFLA's Bob Lassiter and Sam McClellan debate perhaps the most controversial issue of the decade.
He spoke of the ideals and the morals of our founding fathers, something that he obviously doesn't understand. It's something that he obviously has no concept of whatsoever. Wouldn't you agree, Sam?
No, I think you're probably saying that you disagree with the way he acts upon
Wait a second, Sam.
When it happens in the Bay Area, hear it first on News Radio 970 WFLA.
Seems that almost every year was exactly as I just told you about. Every block. It seems that every block throughout the entire country was almost the same. There was a newlywed family. There was a family with a brand new baby. There were several families with several kids, and then there were a couple of families of elderly people. Every year on every block there was a birth and a death. And then slowly, one by one, the people started to move out. I remember Tuesday nights, literally going over to my grandparents' house to watch Uncle Milty. And if Uncle Milty was a little bit boring that week, you'd switch over and see what Bishop Sheen was up to. I remember all of this. It's the way life was. It's the way life is supposed to be, isn't it? Except for all those people moving out. You see, on my grandparents' block, you could see across a field to a group of people who didn't own their own homes. They were black people, and they lived in the projects. And you were told never to go near the projects. Weren't really told why, but it wasn't where a nice white boy was supposed to be. See, and all of those neighborhoods were filled with Poles, and they were filled with Irish, and they were filled with Germans and English. They're all called white people now, but back then each neighborhood was quite distinct, at least in the area of the country I grew up in. And I remember those god-awful signs that broke up those neighborhoods. The ones that said for sale, colored preferred. My grandparents had one of those out in front of their house when they moved. And they sold at a loss. I remember the house that I grew up in, or at least spent the first 8 years of my life in. My parents paid $2,200 for it. $2,200. We noticed, by the way, when we were paying the credit card bill over the weekend, that they've upped our limit to $9,000 on one card. The other is $6,000. I walk around, in essence, with $14,000 in my pocket. And the house that I spent my first 8 years in cost $2,200. I remember getting into vicious arguments with people in the early 1960s about this onslaught of communism, the domino theories in this place called Vietnam, where a country people couldn't even find on a map, where they wanted me to go and defend my country. I remember some of my friends. Some of them went to Canada. Some of them went into the National Guard. Some of them went into hiding. Some of them went into the service. I remember this black preacher who used to run around the country talking about equal rights and how it wasn't right that colored people didn't have the right to vote, and how it wasn't right that colored people didn't have the right to eat at a lunch counter, and how it wasn't right that colored people didn't have the right to sit in the front of the bus. And I remember how they used to turn dogs on him and fire hoses. And I remember how they eventually killed him, too. Three months after, by the way, the president that they eventually shot got into office, I quit school. I was the first grandchild. I was the first nephew. I was the one that was going to go to college, and I walked out of school in my junior year in high school and went to New York. By that September, I was smoking dope and trying other weird things, and pretty soon I'd be talking to trees on hallucinogenic drugs and sitting back and looking at the world going by me. I remember vividly 1964, some people coming running down Fifth Avenue in New York hollering, "They're burning down Harlem." And I remember 65 and 66 and 67 and 68 when it was other cities that they were burning down. I remember the brother of the guy that started this whole damn thing over in Vietnam running for president saying, "Hey, we shouldn't be over in Vietnam." They shot him, too. I remember a guy that my grandfather wasn't going to vote for because he didn't like the way his eyes were set, eventually becoming president. I remember 10 or 12 million people voting for George Wallace. remember an awful lot of freaky-looking people, and I mean freaky-looking people, marching on the Pentagon in Washington and getting tear-gassed, marching on the Democratic Convention in Chicago and getting tear-gassed and beaten, and they were people that looked awful bad. Long, dirty hair, weird clothes. But I kind of liked what they said. I kind of thought it made sense. I just didn't necessarily like them. And eventually, that's the way the entire country seemed to feel. Well, you know, I guess what they're saying makes a little bit of sense. But along the way, there were bumper stickers saying, love it or leave it. There was some stupid people who did things like sew flags on the seat of their pants and burn them, and there were other people who beat the hell out of them for doing it. I remember all of that very, very well. I remember when they changed the name of Levittown to Willingboro. Now it seems as though Thanksgiving visits are more often done on the phone than in person. It's kind of silly to stand out on your front porch if you have one and bang on a pot on New Year's Eve and holler Happy New Year to the entire world, because most homes are set up so that you can't even see your neighbor. Damn few homes have front porches anymore anyway. Remember those jet planes that were going to be the way to travel in the future? Well, they seem to be coming apart at the seams. By the way, so is Willingboro. Crime, drugs. Amazingly enough, no black people. Just the sons and daughters of the sons and daughters of the people who moved from the city to avoid crimes and drugs and went to places like Levittown that eventually became Willingboro. It almost seems unreal that I can remember ice wagons, junk men, milkmen, all on the horse-drawn wagons. I'm only 43 years old. I know for some of you 43 seems to be very ancient, but I promise you when you get to be 43, you'll say things like, only 43 years old. You'll say those kinds of things too. I remember a president who lied. I remember an attorney general who was thrown into jail for obstructing justice. I remember a country torn down the middle, half of the people saying, well, it's okay if the president lies. And the other people saying, no, this is a travesty. This must not be. I remember a president who, in essence, had a campaign to beat inflation by saying no to inflation. They more or less laughed him out of office and replaced him with the guy that was referred to as a peanut farmer. He had awful inflation. That was really the direct result of, tampering with things like the gold standard and oil embargoes and worldwide grain shortages and this kind of stuff that drove up prices, but they blamed it on him and replaced him with another guy, not terribly dissimilar to the guy that was around when I first started to notice things. A nice old man. Got his facts mixed up. Unfortunately, you don't play golf anymore if you're the president. I'm sure Ronnie would if it hadn't been for Ike. All these things I remember. And you want me to come in here and sit down and talk with you straight on a Monday morning when the only thing that matters in life is burgundy dead cowskin seats in a car? I've got 40 or 50 or 60 or 70, I haven't counted them yet, postcards. Say, please, Muffy, let Mad Dog get his dead cowskin seats. And that's great, I love them. I think it's going to probably swear. I think maybe before the week is over. I'm not going to get it today, but maybe before the week is over. And that's great and fantastic, but there's not a postcard here that says anything about anything that I've just talked about. Nothing. I haven't the vaguest idea what's going on. And I'm not going to be presumptuous enough as to come in here and sit down on a Monday morning, October the 24th, 1988, and say this is what you should talk about. I'm just going to turn it over to you guys. To you now. We'll make it an open program. Because I don't know. I haven't the vaguest idea. I've talked about football. I've talked about sandwiches. I've talked about who knows what. Let me give you the telephone numbers. You know, I sat here Friday night and listened to a guy that, roughly half the people say, he's a great American hero. And he talked a lot about Central America, and he talked a lot about Nicaragua. And, you know, the more I listened to him, and he talked for 45 minutes, damn near to the second, by the way, And the only thing I really heard him say is that these places are godless, and that therefore we should kill people because they're godless. We should eradicate godless people, i.e. communists. And I never once heard him mention any of the problems that the people have in Nicaragua. Apparently the only thing wrong in Nicaragua is that there's a godless government. He never mentioned anybody who doesn't have shoes or doesn't have enough food or can't read or doesn't have, medical treatment or anything like that. It was only godlessness. And an awful lot of people, by the way, defying virtually everything that is mentioned in the Sermon on the Mount, paid a lot of money to listen to him talk and applauded very nicely after he got up and left. And then Sam and I sat here and screamed and shouted at each other and screamed and shouted at the callers and had a grand old time and went home and forgot about it. And so here it is, Monday morning. Monday afternoon. It's my Monday morning, your Monday afternoon, probably. And, hey, what more can I say? Sometimes I think, again, I'm a weird dude, and these thoughts really do go through my head. Sometimes I sit down and I think about somebody in their 80s or 90s or even over 100, and all of the technological advances that they've seen in their lifetime, things that weren't even thought of when they were in their youth, telephones, televisions, automobiles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I wonder, how are these people dealing with the world? Well, I think the changes that have happened in my lifetime, maybe not so much in terms of technology, computers, color televisions, okay, that's all neat and fine and well. But there have been far more profound changes in my lifetime because through most of their lifetimes, the 70, 80, 90-year-olds, through most of their lifetime there was still neighborhood, there was still family, there was still roots, there was still a sense of identity and a feeling of belonging and so forth and so on. And I, especially myself, but for the most part, many people in my generation, have virtually none of this anymore. The neighborhood's gone, the block's gone, the family's gone, the sense of identity is gone, the roots are gone. And, what the hell else is there left in life except burgundy dead cowskin seats?
Absolutely right. The technology really, I don't think, has that much to do with it. I really don't believe that.
We are going to visit Mary's family on Thanksgiving Day via the telephone. Why are we going to do that? Because my job does not permit me to go all the way back to Davenport, and beside I did it last year, and it's going to cost me over $1,000 if I do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for 10 minutes we'll visit on the telephone, and it's all over.
Do you remember approximately 30 years ago, Nikita Khrushchev said that we will bury you? And a lot of people were afraid that he was going to come and drop an atom bomb on top of us. Our society, and it's not just us, it's the whole world, but our society something is wrong. And I really think that he was talking about this sense of materialism that was just going to destroy our inner fabric. And it's coming to pass. And we've either got to wake up to it and do something about it, or we are going to fall to the extreme one way or the other.
Well, I'm not sure that calling it materialism or being materialistic is really the problem. For example, I don't think it would be the end of the world if everybody still lived back in the neighborhood and was materialistic. I remember people in the neighborhood, one guy had a Cadillac and the other guy only had a Chevy, but somebody else had a Buick.
That's not what I mean by materialism. What I mean is the giving up of all values, of human values, for the materialistic gain. I was proud of it. My dad always made sure he had the biggest car when I was growing up. But that was one thing. But my dad was very committed to his family and to the family getting together, so on and so forth. That's what is missing. It's not the materialistic going and getting better things. That's always been human nature. But it's when you start giving up all of your other values to do it. That becomes the problem.
I sat in a stadium yesterday with roughly 50,000 other people watching a horrendous football game. And I sat there
I was lucky. I watched the Eagles on TV.
Well, I left a little bit early. Unfortunately, I lucked out and saw the last 5 minutes of that game,
too.
Whole game. But I sat there in a stadium that was primarily quiet. Nobody really said anything. It was, another Sunday afternoon, and Tampa Stadium got suckered out of another $21 a pop or whatever it was that they ended up paying, plus the parking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought back to a few years ago in this, marvelous, perfect place, the absolute best place in the whole wide world to live, Philadelphia. And I thought back to a few years ago when another football team was having a rough time, and their quarterback was throwing interceptions left and right, and the team just wasn't winning, and it was just awful, but there were still 65,000 people in the stadium. There had been 65 the week before, and there were going to be 65 the week after. And I remembered these people who had this sense of identity and the sense of community and the sense of belonging on a nationally televised football game without any prompting. 65,000 people just started to chant bull cocky. Well, it wasn't actually cocky, but there was another word for it. And 65,000 people just sat there for 5, 10, 15 minutes going, bull cocky, because they cared. I mean, it was their town. It was their team. You know, okay, so the team was comprised basically of big white goons and big black goons from southern colleges who initially grew up in Cleveland anyway, and they were playing in Philadelphia. But that didn't make any difference because the Eagles were Philadelphia, damn it. And people cared about Philadelphia. Now I find myself sitting with 50,000 people, and most of them started to leave at halftime.
Maybe that's because very few of us were born and grew up here.
Well, of course.
And we become a transient society.
Of course.
I've lived in Tampa for 8 years. I'm an Eagles fan. I am not a Bucs fan. And that's part of our problem, this transient life that we now have.
Exactly. Nobody's from any place anymore, or so it seems, especially if you live in a part of the country from basically the Mason-Dixon line south. People used to dream of moving out to the suburbs, and when they moved out to the suburbs, they found out that Levittown became Willingboro, and it still had all the problems, so now they moved to the Sun Belt. And the Sun Belt has all the same damn problems the other place had, too, except it's even worse because nobody has any sense of identity. Nobody has any sense of belonging or feeling, myself included. So, what's left except hot tubs and dead cowskin seats and Piaget watches and computers,
I feel the same as
phone
you
calls on Thanksgiving.
It gets very frustrating. And I don't know, something's got to happen or we're going to go down the way of past civilization.
I don't think anything can happen. It's gone. It's over with. It's done. Well, you can't go back.
No.
You can't go back. And
no. But we've got to learn to grow up in the circumstances that we have, and we're not doing it.
All that's left is to withdraw. That's all that's left is to isolate yourself, make your own private little world as comfortable as possible. That's all that's left.
All the talk about drugs and say no and Noriega and everything else, what you've talked about, this is the root cause of why drugs are so prevalent in our society. Nobody really belongs anymore. They're looking for a way out.
Exactly. You see, you grew up in a neighborhood on a block. I grew up in a neighborhood on a block. Well, there are still theoretically neighborhoods. They have real fancy, cute names now. But unfortunately, the neighbors no longer have names.
That's right.
Just the neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
Amazing, isn't it? Thank you, Kevin.
It is. Okay. Have a good day, Bob.
We'll dub this an Esoteric Monday, which is another very clever way for saying open phones.
Anyway, I missed Lionel's show yesterday. How was it?
I don't know. I didn't listen to it. You think I'm going to go out of my way to listen to Lionel?
You would get a swell head if that actually got out that you did listen and
well, he's a swell guy.
Well, so, I knew it was going to be on, but somehow I got tied up in doing other things, and I guess I have a short attention span, and I forgot, and I didn't tune in. So maybe one day I'll get to hear him as the host rather than the guest.
I was listening to your program, and one thing that caught my attention real quick was, a little retrospect of the 60s, where I lived up in, actually near a town up in New York called Levittown. There was one, I believe, in Philadelphia, also in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think there was another one outside of Washington, too, if memory serves me.
When I was a kid growing up in that area, I knew everybody on my block. No matter who they were, 10, 12 people up and down the block, we all knew each other. I've lived in Pinellas Park now just moved out over 11 years, and I don't even know my next-door neighbor when I moved out. I honestly did not know their last name.
Well, it's like I said, all the neighborhoods now have cute little names. It's just the neighbors no longer have names.
And, that's true. I think the people are just afraid to come out. They're in their little cocoons. And,
no, what the hell? We've all spent the last 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years trying to get to this position in life, where you don't have to know anybody. You don't have to care about anybody.
Yeah. And it's a shame, too, because that's what's happening with the world, according to Oliver North, too. There's people, like you say, don't even know where Nicaragua is on a map. And I've called you up previous times. I don't know if you remember. In fact, I sent you a couple of tapes concerning this. And to me, this is an interesting part of the world there because it's like a proving ground of the way people really think in this world. And it's amazing that people that really don't even know what's going on.
Well, Chambers of Commerce love to hear this kind of talk coming out of my mouth. But what the hell? I've said it before. I'll say it again. But it's places like Florida, places like Atlanta, places like Phoenix that have destroyed this country. Not the liberals, but all of these little places, what were little places 15, 20, 30 years ago, like Tampa, like Fort Lauderdale, like Atlanta, Phoenix, as I've already mentioned, Memphis, et cetera, who have gone out of their way to invite migration to the areas, both business and individual migration, have really destroyed this country. That is, they broke up the old neighborhoods, they broke up the old families, they broke up the old roots. It's not liberals, it's not conservatives, it's just the way it happened. Well, Chambers of Commerce.
Honestly, in my outlook, I don't know what a liberal is. I'm hearing definitions of what a liberal is and a conservative. To me, I don't know. It's just the way a person thinks, and to me, there's really no difference. Maybe one person has a liberal-minded attitude towards something, and so automatically he's got the notorious L tattooed on his chest. But what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything to me.
I don't know.
It's lip service, as far as I'm concerned. I have no idea, but this...
Carpetbaggers, that's what has destroyed this country. Carpetbaggers. Let's call a spade a spade.
Carpetbaggers.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like guys that move from Illinois to, Iowa, and then on to Hollywood, and then to Washington,
Uh-huh. But I think it's passing on down from generation to generation. It's I guess apathy in a manner of speaking. We just don't really care. We just sink into our little cocoons, and we wait for the next person to do something radical. People just don't even care. And one of the most frustrating things is I listened to you Friday night, you and Sam, Steve and Sam, as you call him, and I thought you were both good. You both held your ground admirably, except I called Sam up Saturday morning, which was a mistake. It's a very frustrating person to talk to. No matter what you say to him, it's God, country, and Ollie North. Very frustrating. And I threw a couple of if, ands, and buts at him, such as where does a man, where is the difference between a person who crossed the line, between legalities and just because he's wearing a uniform and such, because in my opinion, I honestly believe Oliver North had good intentions, but as I threw at him a couple of times, I don't know, does the means justify the ends? And he had no explanation. He just kept on talking in a roundabout way. And I can understand the frustration talking to him such as you did Friday night. Do you agree at all?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how much frustration I have. I sit back and I think, or at least I try to think realistically about the likes of Savin Sam and Bob, DeAndrea over there, and all the other guys.
Well, don't you agree?
Even Ollie North to a degree, who come on and say things like, this great campaign that Channel 22 is doing. What is it? God, Country, and Family.
Yeah.
Well, my goodness, who could possibly argue with that? All these guys want to do is go back to the neighborhoods that I spoke of, the times that I spoke of at the beginning of this program. That's all they want to do. It's all any of us want to do. They just don't realize how we got here and the fact that you can't go back.
No, you can't go back. In fact, it's going to be getting worse before anything. You see the light at the end of the tunnel as far as I'm concerned. But, I don't know, just because this man was in the services, he wore a uniform. Now, I was never in the services. My dad was a Marine. And he doesn't agree with anything that Oliver North has to say. And some of these people I hear that say, well, he was in what he was doing was for the God and country. I think that's a lot of hooey. What this man did, he overstepped his authority and bounds, and by great means. And it's just ridiculous the way blind patriotism is taking over. People don't see it. It's like those little blinders on horses. They just see in front, and they don't realize what this man is doing for the downfall of this country. I really believe that.
What can you do?
I don't know.
Get yourself some dead cowskin seats and sit on them.
Well, you take care, Bob. And
be good, mate.
Well, I didn't hear the normal click and hiss, before we came on here, so.
Okay.
But I guess we're here.
Okay.
You brought back a lot of really good memories in your opening monologue, and I really enjoyed that. I grew up in a suburb of Massachusetts and lived for a lot of years in a town called Medford, Massachusetts. And you know what kind of nasty weather we get up there in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember days or evenings, I should say, when I'd be out shoveling out my parking space out in front of the house, when the local cop, and honest to God, Bob, I kid you not, his name was Murphy, Tom Murphy.
I believe it.
Would come by, and we would come down with hot chocolate and hot coffee for him, so he'd be a little bit more comfortable while he walked the beat. And you just don't see that stuff anymore.
Well, not only that, he was also probably a neighbor. Probably lived on the beat. Or just off of
true.
it.
I think he was about 4 blocks from where I lived.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't see that anymore. I mean, people look at the police as the enemy. I think.
Well, we look at everybody as the enemy. Come on, Orrin. It's not just the cops that are the enemy. Everybody's the enemy. You know, what the hell do you have bars in your windows for? A security system for?
Well,
because everybody's out to get you, man.
Well, I don't have any in mind, and I don't own a weapon, so I guess I'm clean on that aspect. But
look over your shoulder when you're going out to the car?
No, I just make the car.
Really?
I just make sure the car is still there.
Right, because one of the enemies might have stolen it overnight. Everybody's the enemy.
But it's amazing that you and I have such similar backgrounds. We both grew up in the same general part of the country, and we're both of the same age. We both escaped, 8 years ago, 9 years ago?
Oh, no, I left there long before I came here 8 years ago.
Well,
with many stops in between.
Well, the same with me. I mean, Lexington, Kentucky, Austin, Texas, back to Kentucky, here to Tampa. And, Bob, I wouldn't go back there. I mean,
See, that's one of the things I could never understand. I remember when my friends in school would be packed up into a station wagon and taken off to someplace, and they were always replaced, it seems, by another family who came from there. Now, what the hell do we have to keep moving these people around for? As a kid, I couldn't understand it. I'm still not so sure I understand it.
I don't understand it at all. I don't pretend to. Now, I happen to find myself at the moment to be a man of leisure. And I could have a gig tomorrow back in New England or New York or New Jersey or someplace in that northeastern corridor. And I will not do it.
Why not?
I just don't want to go back to that mindset, that mentality, that environment again. I just don't.
Well, you want to live in a town where people go to a lousy football game, 50,000 strong, and sit there in silence?
I don't know, because I don't go to that football game. So, if that's what they want to do and they want to spend, 18 or 21 bucks or whatever it is to go do that, fine. That's fine. I understand that. I mean, hell, I lived in Lexington, Kentucky when, people would walk by Rupp Arena and genuflect. But, if that's what they want to do, that's fine. It's just an overall atmosphere and an environment and where you live as to where I'm comfortable. And I am not comfortable back there.
Why not? I've heard you bitch and moan about Tampa. You don't seem to be too comfortable here.
Oh, you've never heard me bitch and moan about Tampa, Bob?
Sure I have. About how things ought to be done differently, how the people ought to think differently, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I make suggestions.
Well, of course. Okay, suggestions, bitch and moan, same thing.
No, good semantics, Bob. I like it. No, really. I just, there's a lot of, climate has a lot to do with it. I mean, I mentioned, bringing the hot chocolate to the cop. I mean, do you like being up there knee-deep or waist-deep in snow, in the middle of January? I don't.
I don't know. It's not particularly pleasing to me, but nor is 95% humidity with 95-degree temperatures particularly pleasing to me either.
Yeah, but
waist deep in humidity.
Yeah, but
what the hell's the difference?
Let's go back about 4 months. Do you remember what it was doing in New York and Boston earlier in the year?
Not much of anything.
No, same thing.
Yeah, they had a hot summer.
A very hot summer.
Very hot.
So, I mean, you've got the same thing, only you have to deal with that damned mindset.
Well, no, you can only have a really hot summer every few years.
Well, that's a topic for another day, but
I'll tell you what they do have there.
What?
That town you grew up in.
Uh-huh.
And even though it has changed, it's still closer to what it was than what it is here.
I would not argue that. And, in fact, I hope to get to you before you went on vacation because there's a few restaurants I would have liked for you to have visited while you were there.
You see, I guess that's the whole point. We all wax philosophically and look back longingly at the good old days and all of these marvelous things that we say that we miss so much and that we ought to have. Excuse me.
Okay.
And Yet say, well, I guess, if it really comes to knowing your neighbors and if it really comes to, about feeling a part of the... that's not quite as important as the temperature. Or it's not quite as important as dead cow skin seats if you have to work someplace else to get them instead of being where it's so marvelous.
Well...
Yes, it doesn't really mean very much.
Maybe it's a great tragedy that we have all lost our sense of belonging to a particular geographic area. I know you haven't, because I've heard you talk many, many times about how you'd like to go back home. And there are times when I reminisce, and, I think about the old friends and the good times I've had, and I'd like to go back there, too. But then
I could probably get a gig for $18-19 a year up there. I could go back tomorrow, too, I suppose, but obviously I don't really want to.
And live on poverty level?
Well, yeah, that's the point, you see. So we all say that we want these things, God, country, family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is an incredible statement to make. I probably have 15, 20 relatives who I've totally lost contact with who live back there. And I sit here and say, I don't have a family.
Well, I
don't anymore.
I don't think I have that many, but I have several whom I've lost contact with, whom through my childhood and so forth were very close to me, and unfortunately I've lost contact with them. They're all retired now. And
of course, my family probably wants to move to Tampa.
No, they're living on Cape Cod, in fact. But, yes, I can reminisce and wax philosophically for about 90 seconds at a time, and then I think January. And no, I don't want to be back in there. I can remember being out there, when I came back from out of the service about 20 years ago, and I lived in, like I say, Medford, Massachusetts, and there's a large Italian population there. And helping Sal, who lived up the block, who owned the little pizza parlor, helping him shovel out his sidewalk in the morning so he could get customers to come in without risk of them falling and breaking their neck. And you just don't see that anymore. I don't care whether it's in Duluth, Minnesota, San Francisco, California, Boston, Massachusetts, or Tampa, Florida. You do not see that kind of kinship anymore. And why that has happened, I don't know. I'm not a philosopher. But it just doesn't happen.
I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. I remember, and it just wasn't that long ago when I moved to Pittsburgh, and I pulled up the truck at 5 o'clock at night in front of the house, and 4 or 5 people I'd never seen before in my life who had lived on this block for a long, long time were out there to carry my furniture into the house, probably to see what the hell I had, but that's beside the point. They still carried the furniture into the house for a handful of beers, and were shaking my hand and welcoming me to Pittsburgh and saying how glad they were that we were there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It still exists in some places. But there are probably even pockets in our unbeloved Tampa Bay where it exists, but they would be pockets, the older neighborhoods.
Well, I'm sure there are, and if there are, more power to them, and I hope that they flourish and continue to exist and grow. I think it's something we really lost in this country, and it's a terrible shame. Granted, we may have very distinct philosophical differences when it comes to politics and, national policy and all of that kind of stuff, but there's kind of an underlying warmth that pervades in those kind of neighborhoods that, for somebody who has never had the opportunity to experience, it's almost indescribable. And I won't attempt to do it here. Bob, I know you've got a lot of other people on the line, and by all means, have a good afternoon.
Take care, Oren. In Tampa, Gene, you're on the air at 970 WFLA. Almost 40 minutes for that.
I have a legal obligation to do this, but I wonder if you have a moral one. Is that now that things are, when you can afford the Piaget watches and even though you kid around with it, you would like to have the Continental and you have the money in the bank. There may be even a legal reason for this. There's no way that you should put some dollars into like the court administrator on that and have them redistributed to your creditors?
Well, that's a very fair question, but I'll take it a step further. The reason I went bankrupt is because of an automobile leasing agency that chose, so that he could write it off of his taxes, to pursue the unfulfilled lease. You see, he had his cars back, and he had back payments for the use of those cars, but I had guaranteed when I signed the lease agreement to fulfill it, and he chose to sue for the fulfillment of the lease.
Right.
And it was an extraordinary amount of money. It was tens of thousands of dollars, and the only way that he could write that off of his income was to make every effort to collect, which included filing suit against me for, in essence, money that was owed for services not rendered.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And I'll be damned. I will be absolutely damned if I give that man one penny toward an unfulfilled lease.
But maybe I'm wrong here. And again, this is personal, and I really feel funny about mentioning it, but and I do. I honestly do. But what I'm saying is that you just can't have bankruptcy against one creditor. You have bankruptcy against a whole bunch of creditors.
Well,
you go bankrupt.
I beg your pardon.
Okay.
The amount of money was so significant, it was far in excess of a full year's gross earnings. We're talking about a big Volvo and a Porsche. And they were only half fulfilled. The leases were only half fulfilled when the cars were returned.
Right.
It was an extremely significant amount of money.
Right.
Enough to force almost any. I mean, I was earning $18,000 a year
I understand.
at the time.
Well, right. And
so what in the hell's your point?
Well, my point is that the guy was wrong. He was doing what his lawyer was telling him to do. Okay? To hell with you. I understand that, and sure, I wouldn't want to have to pay him either. Okay? And from that, well, if you had a MasterCard, if you had a bank loan and stuff...
I didn't.
If you go bankrupt...
I
right?
didn't.
You didn't? Okay,
no.
So that was your only major debt?
Yep.
Okay. So you don't see any more obligation to clear that up, because he was basically
Hell no.
doing... Okay.
Hell no. As a matter of fact, if I ever see the SOB on the street, I'll kick him in the crotch.
Okay. Maybe here's the other question, since you brought it up. At $18,000 a year, which is like $350 a week, something like that, right?
It was about $347, as I recall.
Okay, close enough, because I've worked at that, right? What are you doing driving a Porsche and a Volvo? How come not a Taurus?
Times had been better before then.
Or a Chevette.
Times had been better before then.
Yeah.
Significantly better.
Okay, I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad you answered.
It was something called.
By the way,
it was something called a divorce that ruined me financially. Okay.
But you answering it honestly does show that you have, I think, a higher level of integrity than the average, schmo. And I know it's put on. I mean, maybe you don't have a choice. I mean, you're on the airways and you can't be, that forces you in a way of needing to be a little bit more upfront, because there's too many people out there ready to shoot you down. Correct?
Whatever.
Okay, Beth. Take care.
Be good. Yeah, but there's something else that has changed too, and it's actually a physical thing. Years ago, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever, years ago.
Well, see, I can't.
Excuse me, I could have sworn I was in the middle of this.
I'm 29 years old, and,
I could have sworn I was in the middle of a sentence.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Years ago, literally, physically, just the way that we lived, the physical proximity that we lived forced us into being closer with our neighbors. There were the front porches. There were the homes that were close together. There were... there wasn't 150 feet between your house and the curb, and then 40 feet of street and another 150 feet before you got to the next house. People were closer together physically, and consequently they were closer together spiritually as well. And we've changed all of that.
Well,
tried to.
I don't know if it's changed for the worse with having a little bit more privacy. The house that I particularly live in, it's a tract house, and we've got like 50 feet between us. But I seem to think that your generation, the older generation, 50 or 40 and above, seem to really, that whole generation, whereas my generation, I think that under the baby boomers, seem to be coming together closer.
Who knows?
I just wanted you to know that it is, in pockets, like you say, it is still around. But I just, like I said, I hope people would just let themselves go and hope and help other people without the inclination of hoping that, or wanting somebody else to help them back.
The times that I spoke of earlier, which were just not that far back, were just such a more simple, a less complicated time.
Right.
And I hate to pull rank on you, but there is really just utterly no way that you could understand.
Right.
Let me see if I can give you an example. My grandparents had some friends who moved away from Camden to a town called Riverside that was 12 miles away. They tried to talk my grandmother into moving there along with them to building a new home. It was a town on the banks of the Delaware River, somewhat north of Camden. My grandmother was terrified because she was certain that no one would travel this incredible distance of 12 miles to go visit her while she was alive, let alone attend her funeral. We used to literally, and I'm not exaggerating in any shape, manner, or form, make it a Sunday outing to drive 12 miles to visit these people. That's how much smaller the world was.
Right. Oh, I can understand that.
You know, we would pack up virtually all of our possessions and close the house to drive 63 miles to spend the summer in Ship Bottom, New Jersey. And that was a major move, 63 miles.
Well, it's hard for, like you say, I can't relate to that. It's a time before I was even around, But I can understand how that could be a better time, really.
Well, I don't know that it was better for sure, but it certainly was a hell of a lot simpler.
Well, I think too is the money crunch nowadays with two incomes. People just don't have the time that they had then too of people staying home and developing a lifestyle with interaction in the neighborhood. Well,
you talk in terms of a money crunch. Much of that money crunch is self-inflicted. It was not at all unusual. As a matter of fact, it was very, very, very common that when a man and a woman married and bought a living room set and a bedroom set and a dining room set, they kept that furniture their entire lives. There weren't as many things to squander money on. There weren't VCRs. There weren't washers and dryers combinations that only lasted a couple of years anyway. I mean, when you bought a refrigerator, you expected it to last for the rest of your life. When you bought a car, you expected it to last at least a half a decade. Really a decade if you were at all handy. I mean, only the rich people traded their cars in every 1, 2, or 3 years. The average guy, he expected to keep that car for at least 10 years. And he only needed one. Besides, half the time the car sat at home while he took the bus to work.
Right.
There were fewer things to spend your money on. I'm not sure that life is that much better with a plethora of trinkets. Are you? Well, you don't know, of course. I'm sorry. Forgive me.
Yeah, it's just, I can only go from what I see myself,
I have sitting at home a computer that cost several times what my parents' house cost. Now, okay, I realize that we're not dealing in terms of the same dollars, but if you take that down to the same dollar range, it's about the same. My computer and the software and the crap that I have cost about $10,500, $11,000, which is roughly equivalent to the $2,200 that my parents spent in 1949, I guess it was, to buy that house. Roughly the equivalent. I've got a toy sitting at home that cost more than that house.
But you can afford it. That's the thing,
I don't know that I can. WFLA.
Oh, how you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Hey, that was a pretty good show Friday night.
Well, glad you enjoyed it.
And the guy that was on last night, he was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, but, I've been listening to you for quite a while, and it seems like your show is changing a little bit. I just noticed that today. If you forgive me for saying it, it's more like, what you're talking about today is similar to what they're talking about over there. Gardening, pets. You're strolling down memory lane. It is very boring.
Mm-hmm.
And that guy, he cut you off in the middle of a sentence. That's because you're redundant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not calling up just to jump on you, but I'm telling you, you really are changing. Maybe you should consider moving to TalkNet.
Well, maybe you should consider moving back to Q10 Jive.
People are afraid now, and they were not afraid then.
Afraid of what?
A lot of different things. I remember being able to, at a very early age, be sent downtown, small town, to the grocery store and not worry about that. I've got a 5-year-old daughter now, and I can't imagine even if she was 7 or 8, sending her out on her own to do anything.
Okay, Rick, you're a human being and I'm a human being. There's one thing that human beings have in common throughout the entire world and virtually every society, and that is that we are uncomfortable around things and people that we do not know. In those so-called good old days, we knew everybody.
Exactly.
And when a stranger came into town, I mean, it was something to talk about. When a new family moved into town, it was something to talk about. These people had to be tested and checked out and made sure that, they were okay. Well, now people are constantly moving. There's a moving truck on my block almost every day. There's a big condominium at the end of the block, and that's where most of the turnover comes. It's the same thing. I don't go to the store that I can walk to. I get in my car and I drive to it. It's in another neighborhood still. And we're just afraid of each other, which is a very common and not exactly a new human phenomena.
We are afraid. We keep our doors locked. I remember growing up, and even when I first moved to Florida, didn't have to do that. And for me, that's the major difference, and I miss those days that you're talking about. I think you got a good show this afternoon.
Are you sure that you have to lock your doors today?
Positive.
Or is it just that you want to lock them?
I want to.
Well, okay. See, there's a big difference, isn't there?
Combination of both.
Well, you see, if anybody really wanted to get into your house, that locked door ain't going to stop them, Rick.
That's true.
It ain't going to stop them at all. As a matter of fact, not only are they going to steal whatever they were going to steal, but now you got to replace the damn door.
That's true.
They're probably going to kick it in and destroy the jam.
Well, it helps me sleep better at night.
Because we're afraid of each other.
We are.
Thank you, Rick.
All right, bye.
Off we go to the radio wanderer. Mr. Wanderer, you're on the air.
Yes, Bob. I spoke with you a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very large following, and we were very disappointed with your program. And that's
you mean you got a large tush, a big tush? What are you talking about, a large following?
Yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And we began wandering the dial with me as the leader, trying to find an alternative AM station. We came across, now I don't know what you're speaking of today, because as you know, we don't listen to you anymore. Although we did come across something, and you did say to call you when I did find something.
Mm-hmm.
If you tune into this very station at 3 o'clock on Sunday, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Lionel has a program, which was a very good
Well, I can say that, it's a surprise, but I'm not sure that it's pleasant.
No, well, Bob, a surprise is a surprise. Well, may it be pleasant to some people or not to others. An analogy I might use regarding your program is the Bush and Dukakis campaigns. You being in the Dukakis camp, knowing that you've lost, are resorting to,
Well, sir, I beg to differ with you. I am not in the Dukakis camp. Dukakis would not have been my choice.
No, I'm not saying you're voting for Dukakis. I'm putting you...
Well, I will be voting for Dukakis, but I'm not in the Dukakis camp.
But what I'm saying is your radio program has lost what it once was.
Oh.
Bush being something not quite yet solid.
You mean I don't scream and holler at people like I used to?
Right.
Get off my phone, you subhuman pig.